As you fade away, as you fade away, as you fade away, as you fade away.
Heyo and welcome to our Chaos 35 full melee damage build, which can one-tap every single enemy in Wonderlands on Intense mode and Chaos 35. Doesn't require any god roll gear at all. There's no primordials in my setup, and for example my class mod literally doesn't have a single useful passive on it, so it's genuinely very easy to set up with surprisingly a variety of different gear options as well. For our class combo, I did test out Stabbo, Claw, Brr, and Spell, and the strongest pair we ended up with was Stabbo cross Brr. The points here can actually move around depending on how you actually want to play the build and what loot you currently have as well. I personally don't enjoy stacking things when I get to a boss fight. I want maximum damage with minimum effort. I just want to rock up, use my action skill, my spell, hit them once, and then they'd be done for. So that's the setup I currently have going, but I'll show you guys the different changes we can make as we go. 5 points in Arsenal for increased melee and spell damage. That's for our spell blade, but if you're using a different melee weapon, you can switch that over to potent poisons instead for the status effect damage. Then we have 3 points in haste for melee attack speed, but primarily movement speed, because movement speed means more damage via swift death. At 10%, we get 10% bonus at default walk speed, which of course increases as we run, as well as sliding at an increased speed. Now, I don't spec follow-up, which is probably a weird choice for a melee build, but I, again, don't like stacking things. If you want to chuck the 3 points in here, shoot the enemy first 10 times, you'll do an increased 60% damage, which is quite considerable, but again, you don't really need it like you saw at the clips at the start. You can one-hit everything without doing that. Nimble Fingers, I have 3 points in here for the spell damage for both our Buffmeister and our Spellblade again, but if you're not using the Spellblade, you can move it if you'd like. 1 point in Shadow Step is a kill skill, which your next melee attack is going to be a guaranteed critical hit, which is fantastic if you're out of from the shadows in mobbing situations, because you're going to hit critical hits all the time for bossing, but in mobbing, that's really helpful. 5 points in Sneak Attack increase our critical hit damage by 15%. Now, 1 point with this, you might want to take 3 of these points and chuck them in Exploit Their Weaknesses if you're using at least 2 elements at the same time for each hit. Now, some of the time I have Frost and Lightning going at the same time, so that's instantly going to be an extra 12% damage per hit for just 3 points spent, where we're specing 5 points here for 15% increase. So can be good depending on how many elements you're stacking per hit. So just keep that in mind. Then we have 1 point in Alchemical Agent, if I can pronounce the words. Melee critical hits apply a random status effect to enemies, which can stack up Exploit Their Weaknesses, but even if you don't have a spec like me, you want this anyway, because my one Twitch chat insisted I tried it out, and I understand why now. Wonderlands, damage formula, double dipping, random stuff you don't need to know about. All you need to know is this thing hits like a truck. Trust me, spec it. I hit 3 million damage on my melee swing. This thing's hitting a random status effect dot of 1 million damage. Like, it's way more than 10%, and it takes into account a lot of things. Trust me, you want it. 4 points in Frost damage, because Frost damage could. 5 points in melee damage, and also increases your enrage duration, which if you haven't played Brr before, increases your Frost damage as well. It activates when you hit your action skill, and it lasts 15 seconds, even past your action skill's duration. 5 points in the Old Ways, plus some extra points to our class mod at the moment. Increases your damage when you're very close to the enemy, which, surprise, surprise, melee attack damage, you're always in their face. So you're getting maximum damage out of this, plus some damage reduction, which we really need in Wonderlands because you get one-tapped by a lot of things, so that's really helpful. Don't worry, by the way, we have other survivability plans to keep us alive. 3 points in Icebreaker, one of Brr's insanely strong abilities. Whenever you freeze enemies, which is pretty often because we're doing a lot of AoE frost damage, up to 30% increased damage to those enemies, which is cap. It's way higher than that. Very good ability. 3 points in Cold Snap, Frost Efficiency, so that we can freeze things to do more damage, and then Movement Speed, so we can do more damage. Then we have Blast Chill, Brr's other insanely strong ability. Whenever Fate Maker melee attacks an enemy, there's a 20% chance to release a Frost Nova, dealing Frost ability damage, which hits like a truck. It can't critically hit, but trust me, you don't need it to. It's ridiculously good. Now, I want to make this completely clear. You do not have to rely on this to proc to hit the one-shots. I don't have that kind of patience either. Trust me, if I don't want to stack things, I don't want to have to wait every 5 times to hit a one-shot. Trust me, you can hit the one-shots without it, but the damage number will be even spicier if you do proc it. This is primarily for mobbing situations. Having that AoE frost, freezing things, doing increased damage to those is the thing we have this spec for. For your class power, full spec Brr as much as possible for that bonus frost damage. Stepomancer, you only get from the Shadow's duration. You don't really need that unless you're early on in the build and you're lacking the damage a bit. For your hero points, full spec crit damage because we lack damage, crit chance for the same reason, and then the rest of the points put it in attunement for the skill cooldown, so you can loop that, looping your enchants, keeping that damage up. If you're wondering how I have so many extra hero points, by the way, I have a separate video for that. I'll link it down below. Now, as for the gear, we have the Spellblade for the melee weapon, primarily at least. There's actually quite a lot of different options. The Banshee's the highest damage melee weapon in the entire game, so a fantastic option as well if you're trying to one-shot things in particular. I, for some reason, can't get a good one to save my life. I do have a good fire one, but it's just not a good element in this game at the moment. The Fate Breaker, though, is a fantastic option for survivability for any mobbing situation. You don't really need the Spellblade or the Banshee's huge damage. It's only really needed for bossing situations. Instead, use the Fate Breaker because melee attacks create 3 lightning projectiles that restore ward equal to 100% of damage. So, aka, every single melee attack you hit restores all of your shield, which is fantastic if you're in the middle of a mobbing mosh pit, or if you're in a spicy water puddle, you're good. As long as you're swinging melee attacks, that'll keep you alive. Those are the 3 that I currently use, but there are other options as well. For example, the Twin Soul, I know it's pretty popular. The new DLC 2 melee weapon is pretty good. I haven't used it, but I've seen it in action. There's also purples with huge damage numbers, like 1900 on a purple is fantastic. To be fair, it's a primordial, but it is still pretty good. And then the passive ability you want to try and roll, Echo is fantastic if you're stacking up your damage. Otherwise, Vampire is a really good one for survivability as well. Whenever you're doing melee damage, by the way, you want to be holding the Livewire SMG. This thing's nuts. It chains lightning damage to nearby enemies, just making them explode, and doing a huge amount of extra damage to the enemy you're actually attacking with your melee weapon. You also don't need like a volatile or anything like that. You just want to look out for as big a mag size as possible if you're trying to like get the most amount of damage out of the build. I have a very average one. I have 27 bullets in my mag. It can go up to 35, but just shoot it down to until it only has 1 bullet left, and it does a ridiculous amount of extra damage. They also accidentally buffed it last week, which they're trying to revert. But even without that accidental buff, it's an insane weapon. The rings, you just want to look out for as much melee damage as physically possible. If you're trying to get the best kind of ones, while currently equipped gun ammo is low on ammo, effects increased by 50% is obviously fantastic because we're keeping the live wire on 1 bullet all the time, so that buff is seen all the time. Gun damage isn't really going to help you, but if you get spell damage, that can be a good secondary option if you're using the Spellblade, because the Spellblade does spell damage. The shield, a few different options. I go for the Cursed Wit because I did find one that has a really good passive of 20% bonus melee damage, so I'm getting 120% whenever my shield is depleted. Not great for survivability though on Chaos 35. So the Body Rune is a good option, or the Bad Egg is also a good option because you get melee damage from that as well as Dark Magic boost, as well as you can roll the melee damage passive on that on top of everything as well. Otherwise, just go for a huge survivability one. If not that, the Slip and Stun necklace is really, really good. It is pretty much the Snowdrift plus the Electric Slide artifact from Borderlands 3 put into one necklace in Wonderlands. It's fantastic. You don't actually need to slide. You get the bonus lightning damage all the time. Try and get lightning damage or frost damage for the element, and then whatever helpful passive you can. Other good options, we have the Harbinger for some increased survivability, or the Urge is a really good one for action skill cooldown, as well as spell damage boosts, which of course helps our Spellblade, or our Buffmeister, speaking of which is our spell of choice. You want to be looking out for a bonk or zap variation. It is rare, trust me. I could never get Buffmeisters, so I know the pain, but if you can get both of them, that is exactly why this one's my prized possession. It boosts the Spellblade twice, which is really nice, because bonk means melee damage, zap means spell damage. Otherwise, having bonk and ka-chow is a good one as well, or even just bonk and pure. As long as it's got some melee damage in there, you're going to be benefiting from that. For the class mods, lots and lots of different options. I actually don't use the Amalgam primarily, which is why this one actually has some good passives, and I said my class mod doesn't have good passives. This is the exact class mod I use for all of the one-shots in the clips, and it's actually the one that I use primarily. Using the Cape of Tides is really nice. If you're doing both lightning and frost damage, you're getting both of the effects, which is nice. No helpful passives. Area damage is nothing to me. Melee crit chance is practically nothing to me because we're in from the shadows all the time. and we hit crits, and we hit crits all the time, if I can speak English. It's only a regular legendary. I'd rather Burr be on top, but here we are. The one good thing here is we have 4 points in Swift Death, which is really spicy, but that's pretty much the most basic of Cape of Tides you could possibly use for the build, and we're still one-tapping everything in the game. Other options, amalgams are really good. A bunch of really helpful passes you can roll at the same time. The Paradigm is a fantastic option. It's probably like the next best option to a Cape of Tides, particularly if you don't have the DLC as well, because you can boost your ability and spell damage by 30% of your increased melee damage. So all of these melee buffs that we have via our passives or our skill trees, all that stuff is going to boost our ability and spell damage. That's going to increase our spell damage for our Spellblade, but also our Frost ability damage from our Frost Novas in our skill tree are going to get boosted by that as well. So it's a really good option. Otherwise, there is one more, what's it called? The Smart Armor for 50% increased critical hit damage by reducing our critical hit chance by 50%. That doesn't matter though, because we're in From the Shadows and we hit critical hits 100% of the time. Now, before I forget, the enchants, they do not stack. You have to have a different enchant on each of your individual items. You always have 4 enchants active at one time: the gun you're currently holding, your melee weapon, your shield, and your spell. And I just realized that my shield and my weapon have the same enchant, and I've been wasting like 40% of my damage because I'm a Muppet, and I only just realized that. Don't do what I did to make sure they're mixed up. But on action skill start, 40% melee damage increase is fantastic. 30% increase to melee damage on spellcast, equally fantastic, minus 10%. On your melee weapon itself, you want to have elemental increase by 50%. That's really helpful. You're doing a lot of elemental damage, particularly if you're doing lightning damage, because that's boosting the live wire chains as well. So you just want to have as much damage as physically possible pumped into it. But trust me, I know enchants are difficult to roll. So any little bit of damage, you can have elemental 35%. You can have just regular damage 10, 15, 20. I'm pretty sure it goes up to 30%. Any of those will be helpful to the cause of doing more damage. That is the spicy melee build though. If you guys would like the save file, it is in the Discord. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe. If you guys want to check us out on Twitch, we stream pretty much every night just after we post the videos. And other than that, gamers, have a fantastic night. Catch you guys later. Adios.